to FR Law Group's podcast. We are joining you today. My name is Rita Gara. I'm an attorney with FR Law Group. I'm joined by my fellow attorney, Danielle Olson, and I'm really excited about our topic today. It's certainly a hot topic in the news, trending in areas like the law and lots of entertainment areas. So we are going to talk about artificial intelligence, issues arising out of the use of AI. Super excited to talk about it. I think there's a lot going on. A lot of, I feel like a lot of people have a lot more knowledge than I do about this. I'm really excited to talk about it. It's something that is very relevant to today. So why don't we kind of start from the basics? What are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence or AI?
Yes, so artificial intelligence refers to the simulation of human intelligence in machines. It's machine learning, machines that are capable of thinking like human beings. So there's different types of artificial intelligence. I think the two major categories right now is there's narrow artificial intelligence and then there's general artificial intelligence. Narrow artificial intelligence is referred to as the weaker form of artificial intelligence. Essentially what it means is that there's a lot more constraints on what the artificial intelligence can do. All of the artificial intelligence that we see today, or as far as I know, is all narrow artificial intelligence, meaning that there's some type of constraint on what the artificial intelligence is allowed to do. General artificial intelligence, in theory, allows the machine to think and have the same capabilities as human intelligence, understand and apply knowledge in different contexts autonomously.
I think that's kind of the area. It brings up the old sci-fi movies like I, Robot that people are really interested in terms of the ability to learn and kind of outpace learning of humans in some aspect. That's super interesting.
Right, and there are definitely companies out there that are testing the boundaries of how far they want to go, but allowing themselves to kind of pull back on the AI. You know, that's sort of a topic that we'll go into as far as how much we're able to control artificial intelligence. To what extent are we going to control artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that, but maybe before we head into that direction, I think a term that I know I've heard a bunch, I'm sure most people have heard, and maybe we can talk about what this means is the term chat GPT. Yeah. What is chat GPT and what is it used for?
Sure, so chat GPT is a form of generative AI.
Okay.
So, which is another distinction between general AI and generative AI. The generative AI part just means that it generates responses. ChatGPT, if you ask ChatGPT what it is, its definition, generative AI refers to a subset of artificial intelligence technologies that can generate new content. Whether it be text, images, music, or other forms of media that is similar to the content it has been trained on, but not identical. So it's still within that narrow AI category because there are still constraints on what it can create.
And if I understand correctly, correct me if I don't, there are then different types of chat GPT, is that right?
That's correct. And part of that I think has to do with part of it has to do with how much data these programs can hold. Right now, there's at least two different types. There's ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4.0. ChatGPT 3.5 is free for users, so you can go look up OpenAI ChatGPT right now. You can plug in your email address and you can start using ChatGPT. It's a basic service. It'll generate responses to questions that you ask it. It's like a search function, like a search engine, like Google or Bing or something like that. And it will, it can draft things for you. It can come up with new ideas, but it is limited in its capabilities. So ChatGPT 4.0, it's the newer generation of ChatGPT. It is a subscription service. I think right now it's about $20 per user, and it allows you to do much more than the ChatGPT 3.5 version. You can actually ask it to create images, so it will draw something for you. And sometimes they can be pretty complex for a computer generated image. It also is able to handle much more complex ideas and queries, and it will just also respond in much more complex and longer responses.
So you've raised a ton of things that I think are super interesting and that I've heard about in terms of issues that the ability to draw, the issue of the ability for it to draft something. These are issues I want to talk about in terms of just in general. I think it's super interesting, but also as lawyers, how that comes into play in what we do and the issues that we've seen many headlines. So maybe we can talk about the rise of AI and the use of it in the legal practice and the areas that it impacts. I think, again, we've seen and we'll get into detail. We've seen it with respect to drafting, but I think it touches on a lot of areas related to the practice of law that an attorney needs to be aware of and want to be aware of both useful things and negative things.
Right.
So for instance, let's take billing. How potentially does AI affect billing in a legal practice?
Sure. In the future, it might be something that law firms use when in their own billing systems. I haven't heard of that happening yet, but what I have heard of happening is companies that hire the law firms, they will use AI in receiving the bills from the attorneys, and they will use AI to kind of go through the hours billed to make sure that, they weren't overbilled, or if they have questions about, why was this billed? What was worked on here? Why was it this many hours?
Duplicate billing.
Duplicate billing, absolutely, yes. It will review all of that for the company. And the idea is to mitigate costs.
And I would imagine, we've taken on some construction cases where the billing gets into the, six figures, and it involves numerous time entries spanning multiple years. I can see where that would be such a useful tool in that, instead of having somebody go through hundreds of pages with a magnifying glass reading every entry, that can probably be done in really quick time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so billing is one area where we've seen it used in the law. Another area would be drafting contracts, even revising contracts. So, which you have to be careful about that, and I'll get into that more. Just because of the information you do put into ChatGPT, it is like giving information to a third party. So, if you have questions about maybe a clause within the contract or ideas on how to write it or other language you could use, that might be a possibility, but you want to be really careful about putting party information in or specific company information in, because you always want to remember that you're giving that information to a third party. That information could potentially be packaged and sold to another party.
So you're going to have issues in terms of, I'm just thinking in terms of legal issues that would kind of derive from that. You're going to have potential issues with privilege if you're sharing with a program, and you're going to have issues with how secure is that program, and can you understand how secure that is? How hacking, is hacking an issue that's going to be relevant to that? Are they storing the stuff that they're putting in there? And then I would imagine also, I know in a lot of cases we deal with confidentiality stamps, the documents the parties have agreed, whether it's trade secrets or other private business information, that's going to have an effect if there's a confidentiality order filed with the court. Are you going to have to file a motion to get permission to use these things? These are all things that are going to have to be figured out and argued about as we go down this road, I would imagine. What about the idea of brainstorming, for example? How is it useful? Is it useful? How are ways that an attorney can utilize it in that regard?
Yeah, so one way that an attorney might use it for brainstorming purposes might be, let's say you have, you filed a complaint, there is a counterclaim that's filed, and you want to present arguments to attack the counterclaimant's arguments. You might put in one of the arguments from the counterclaim, and the ChatGPT might be able to generate ideas in ways that you can attack that argument. Now, some of them are based in the law, but some of them might just be brainstorming ideas on how, common sense, this doesn't make sense. And how you want to work with that is you would go to a legal database like LexisNexis, Westlaw, and find cases that support arguments that you're looking for. So it might be a way to, you know, if you're trying to think of a way that you may want to draft a certain clause within a contract, and there's a certain requirement that the client wants, or a need that the client wants within that contract, it may give you ideas on how you might be able to draft that in a way that fits the client's objectives. That could be another way. Now, again, it's not a source where you want to copy and paste, I wouldn't say. I think you always want to just use it possibly for ideas, or strategies, but as far as using it as the end all be all, it's not there yet, and also it doesn't have the same capabilities as I think an attorney might have in understanding the client's needs and having that face-to-face interaction. And it doesn't always give accurate information or accurate legal information.
I think we're going to talk about that a little bit further on, but we've certainly seen headlines where people have gotten in trouble for that. And I want to talk about that because I think that's it has the potential for some serious abuse, and you can find your legal license in a little bit of trouble, I think, if you're not careful and relying on it too much.
Yes.
What about things like one of the tasks that can consume a lot of an attorney's time and money for the client would be discovery review, especially if you're talking about a case that has, you know, we have cases with, again, 6 figures in terms of the number of documents that have to be reviewed. Is that something that can ease the burden in that space?
I think so. We haven't seen it as much yet. It's still very new and it's developing. But what we are seeing is some of these discovery platforms that law firms use is they're starting to incorporate AI into their discovery platforms, which will allow both the discovery platform and the law firm to be able to sift through material using search terms much faster.
Okay.
So in the cases, for example, where we have over 500,000 documents that we have to go through, I can see the potential benefit of using AI in discovery process by being able to review discovery much faster, which will save time and money for the client. And in fact, FR Law Group may be implementing AI into its discovery process even as soon as this year. We're looking into that right now.
And that it does bring up an interesting point, and I don't know if we're going to touch on this later, but I'll mention it now and we can circle back if there's more to discuss. But it is interesting in thinking about the use of it, and if it's saving your client money, will there come a point where there's a professional obligation to utilize these things? Because I can imagine between you know, having somebody go through each document versus, I mean, we kind of have already seen that with electronic discovery services, but I would imagine at some point there could be an obligation where if the difference in a bill between somebody who's using AI and somebody who's not using AI is, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. I imagine that's going to be an issue.
Absolutely. I think it is still so new. There aren't answers to these questions yet.
Yeah.
So it's the legal world right now is trying to figure out what is the best case use of AI and where are we going to put regulations on this, you know, when is it considered an abuse of AI?
Which obviously then raises a specter of using it for motion writing, argument writing. Before we get into kind of some of the abuses we've seen of that and some pitfalls of relying on that at this point anyway, going back to, I liked what you were talking about with respect to its use for, I think it's a brainstorming, the idea of, you know, I think Google is something that we all use to get you started somewhere with an idea or point you in the right direction outside of the legal field. And it reminds me kind of that as a starting point for brainstorming. And I could see where that would be really helpful if you're using your checks and balances that we'll talk about. But what about its use in terms of, you know, summarizing cases or using it when you're trying to, you know, synthesize a bunch of research that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's best use right now within the legal field is with summarizing information. It's very good because it's all about input output, right? Garbage in equals garbage out. Whatever you put into it, it's going to be able to conceptualize much better, I think, than it just coming up with its own ideas. It's able to do that, but it's a work in progress. So if you give it a specific case and then you ask it to synthesize it, it will be able to summarize legalese and put it into plain language. It's easier for the layperson to understand. You do have to be careful about this though, because there have been instances where it has interpreted case law incorrectly. I mean, that's why lawyers go to law school. They learn how to interpret the law. There's still arguments about how the law is interpreted. That's why there's two sides to a case. So it's not always clear cut. And there have been instances where AI has interpreted a case incorrectly. And so you always have to cross-reference, check with your attorney, check with your lawyer, or lawyers check with a legal database and, maybe consult with other attorneys on their interpretation. But as far as summarizing information, for the most part, it's pretty good at what it does in summarizing information.
Yeah, and a really good beginning.
Yes.
But not the end of the story.
Correct.
So obviously we have kind of touched on, this is certainly, well, it's already raised and will continue to raise ethical considerations. So let's go through some of the ways we've seen this kind of rear its ugly head already and things to think about for the future. What are some of the ethical issues in practicing law and using AI?
Sure. I think the first one that comes to mind is confidentiality. You want to be very careful. I think that, if you are going to use ChatGPT, it's still, you're still giving information to a third party and you still have confidentiality, ethical requirements, and obligations. So you wouldn't, you may not want to provide party information, as mentioned earlier, or specific case information. Using it for generalities or for legal research or to get ideas, or even checking grammar. You could use it for that. But you do have to be careful about the information that you put in there because you have to understand that you're giving it to a third party. Another ethical consideration would be misinformation. There are federal rules, there's ethical obligations to not lie and to not provide incorrect information to the best of your ability. And that the information that you're providing is based on some type of, information that can be verifiable.
And to the best of your ability isn't going to be appearing before a judge saying, well, I pulled this from
ChatGPT
and didn't bother looking up a single quote or item or case citation.
Absolutely.
That's not going to cut it.
Absolutely. And we've seen that happen in a case in the Southern District of New York. There was an attorney who used ChatGPT to find cases for his brief. There were 6 cases that were incorrect in that brief. When asked about it by the court to say, hey, we can't find these cases, can you please provide us more information on these cases? The attorney ended up going back to ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to find the cases. ChatGPT then created excerpts of cases that were fake, that didn't exist.
Alarming.
And what it was doing there was it was hallucinating, and we can talk more about what that means. But the attorneys essentially doubled down with their ChatGPT research and then presented those excerpts to the court. Well, the court did their own verification.
Legitimate verification.
Yes, and found out that these cases did not exist, and those attorneys were sanctioned and fined $5,000.
I think that's such an important point is, as much as that, the facts of that seem crazy that somebody would not verify and then, as you said, double down and use it, the same thing that got him into the problem in the first place, use it to verify his work, or well, not his work. And that is interesting because I think that, there's certainly unethical people in every profession, and sometimes also it's just a matter of, we all know what it's like to be really busy and have deadlines, and you just think, oh, this is just a crutch I can use this time to get this, work product out. And it's we're gonna have to be really careful. And I think it also points to where AI is at this point. It's this kind of huge new fun toy, but it has serious limitations that you really have to be aware of as you're, if you're gonna use it in any capacity.
Absolutely, and I think it's a balancing act for lawyers and for law firms right now, because you also don't want to be left in the dust, and you don't want to not adapt, because I think at this point AI is inevitable. It's not going away unless something drastic happens. Because I mean, imagine a law firm that didn't use Google, or imagine a law firm that only used books in order to do all of its legal research, or to only reviewed physical documents to do its discovery. It would just set that law firm back ages. And so I think you have to adapt with the times, but you have to be very careful and cautious as you're moving forward. And I think moving forward slowly is how lawyers are successfully utilizing this tool.
Yeah, and I think there are already a number of a good resource for lawyers who are trying to educate themselves beyond Google, and especially within the realm of legal practice, is CLEs. Look for those CLEs that are out there. I know there are a number of them to start getting yourself educated. And I do think it's an interesting point, and it goes back to what we discussed before with billing and the savings to your client. When you talk about don't get left in the dust, I mean, it is kind of like moving forward with electronic evidence, presenting evidence, on an overhead screen instead of in physical form, doing Zoom hearings instead of in person. I mean, we are in that technological age, and it is going to be, it is here to stay in one form or the other. You mentioned hallucinations. This is such a fascinating thing. Let's talk about hallucinations.
Yes. So again, according to ChatGPT, hallucinations refer to instances where the model generates incorrect, misleading, and really entirely fabricated information. So there was a very interesting study recently done by Stanford, where they found, I think that they did 200,000 legal questions on OpenAI's ChatGPT 3.5, Google's Palm 2, and Meta's Llama 2, all general purpose models not built for specific legal use. But they are large language models, and they found that these large language models hallucinate at least 75% of the time when answering questions about a court's core ruling.
I mean, that's a terrible number.
Yeah, awful.
It's not a workable number.
Yes, so definitely goes to show the risk of using AI and how that can give you incorrect, misleading, fabricated information. So definitely don't 100% rely on AI, but there's with having this information, having this study done, I think it's going to give the developers of AI, a starting point on how they can improve the technology as well. So sure. Even that, I think what we're hearing about AI right now is just the magnitude and the significance of how quickly it can learn and adapt, obviously much quicker than a human brain. So who's to say that in a year that these types of studies show that there's a much smaller rate of error?
Yeah. It's frightening, but I think that is an interesting point that and as with any kind of new technology, the developers are going to have to learn from the person who has the unfortunate experience of relying on a hallucination in court.
Absolutely. And I think, an interesting question here is, if somebody is harmed by the hallucination of AI, who's held accountable?
Yeah.
Because right now, we don't, as far as I know, there's no case law out there that provides damages for someone as a remedy if AI creates something that ends up being false. So is it the developers that are held accountable? And if so, that will, I think, incentivize those developers to have, clear constraints on what AI can and cannot do.
This is just a side note, not necessarily related to the law, but it reminds me of this, when you talk about like who's to be held responsible. It was interesting. I think many of us watched the writer's strike that was going on that took a long time to resolve, and one of the issues that came up there was the use of, a person's identity or
Yes.
AI identity, and so many issues there, whether it's, being compensated for that or the right to use it in how many different, is there an endless ability to use that image? And go ahead.
Yeah, and what will be really interesting, especially within entertainment law, is because AI is essentially compressing all of the information that's input into it, copyright, and intellectual property law, how that's going to be implemented with people using AI information in the material that they put out into the world.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the concerns of that strike is, are we going to use real writers that create content out of their imagination? And, there already are restrictions in place for them not copying other people's material and then producing that as their own. At what extent is AI using other people's material to produce its ideas?
Yeah, how
And
original
should that be
can,
protected?
how original can an idea from
Oh.
ChatGPT be?
Exactly.
And so I think there's, it's overwhelming, honestly, when you think about the amount of litigation that's coming.
Yes.
And the laws that will have to be put on the books as, it also still continues to develop. But I think we're all familiar with, there have been some pretty big headlines where AI has gone wrong for businesses. Let's talk about some of those examples.
Yes. So in 2016, Microsoft came up with a it was an AI chatbot called Tay, and it was designed to develop conversations understanding by interacting with humans, and it interacted with humans through Twitter. And essentially, it would take other people's posts and communicating with it to learn how to communicate with other people.
If you're learning how to communicate from Twitter or any comment section, it is a little scary.
Yes, and Microsoft had to shut that down after one day of use because the chat bot started saying racist, sexist, and very offensive things on the Twitter platform.
Yeah.
So that was one example of where AI went wrong for Microsoft. Another example in 2021, Zillow, the online real estate marketplace, they announced to its shareholders that it was going to wind down its Zillow offers operations and cut 25% of the company's workforce, which was about 2,000 employees. So the reason for the layoff was because it had used AI. It was the result of the error rate of the machine learning algorithm it used to predict home prices. And Zillow said that the algorithm had led it to unintentionally purchase homes at higher prices than its current estimates of future selling prices. And this resulted in a $304 million inventory write-down in its Q3.
Wow, and that's again similar to the attorney who doesn't double check or verify. You wonder what kind of processes they went through, or do they just rely on that, the algorithm,
Right.
the calculation? That's a significant business loss.
Right. In the case where the attorneys were fined $5,000, I think it was a federal tort case. I don't know how significant the damage was to their client. I think they ultimately did end up losing that one. But on these high profile cases, if somebody makes a mistake that, to what extent could these damages be because of somebody using AI in it?
Yeah, and you're talking about damage to a business that you've self-inflicted. You're talking about damage to a client when you have not relied on a good sound law or law that even actually exists, and it's damage to your reputation. I think that's what we're seeing too, is whether it's in the context of your reputation as an attorney and not making really good decisions, or your reputation as a business. If you are making decisions based on that don't have a good outcome, like this outcome, it can have a significant impact. What about so this was something that I think kind of captured everybody's imagination and horror, was the deep fakes. What is a deep fake?
Yeah, deep fakes are fake images of real people. So it's happening,
They're good. I remember the first one I think I saw was a Tom Cruise deepfake, and you couldn't tell that it wasn't him. They're just as if you're looking at the actual person.
Right, and I think a recent example was Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
There was an image of her that went viral, that was explicit, obviously something that she didn't want out there in the public and harmed her. And it took the.
But it wasn't her.
No, it wasn't her.
It wasn't
Yes,
her.
to be clear, it was a deep fake image of her that AI had generated. And it was viral on X's platform. And it took them 19 hours before they were able to take that image down. Even though it went against the platform's social media policy, it was, and eventually the account was suspended. But definitely is going to raise, I think, some litigation as far as who's responsible for that image getting out there into the world and it being allowed to be up there for 19 hours.
Yeah, I think it implicates a lot of different areas, and what are these, we just saw, if you watched, the heads of some of our big social media platforms called the task on their lack of, I suppose, protections within their platforms of protecting children. But I think this is kind of another area. What kind of responsibilities are businesses going to have? Whether you're talking about a giant company like Meta or Twitter or TikTok, or you're talking about a local business who hires somebody to create content for them and they unwittingly use a deepfake. You're also going to have, it reminds me of when this whole identity theft crime first started and people were, pulling their credit reports and seeing, a mortgage that they hadn't purchased or a credit card that they hadn't opened. It seems to me that the potential for identity theft on another level is going to be there. It's going to be, I wonder how hard it will be to kind of get to the bottom of, prevent, prosecute, because it's all done behind a screen. So that's going to be something that is going to be, I think, a headache for years to come as well.
Absolutely. And I think the only way we even know how to understand more about this is by asking questions of the developers of artificial intelligence and saying, what information, what constraints are you putting on artificial intelligence? And they're going to have to track all of that and be able to give their reasons for why they did or did not put a constraint into AI that potentially caused harm to another person.
I think it's, we're talking a lot about like images, and I think one of the things I've seen this as scams being discussed in terms of, don't fall for the scam is, using they're taking your voice as well. So you have this potential to take somebody's physical image that looks perfectly, and then they can get, just a clip of your voice from answering a phone call and then attaching that to it. It's going to be really difficult to fight some of these. And I think it's something that, from a protecting yourself, hiring an attorney to address some of these issues in terms of, if you are in the any sort of entertainment or social media field, if you use social media for your business, we're doing a podcast, how are you advertising? Do you have an Instagram page to advertise your business? And if you are hiring somebody to do work for you, what do you understand what they're using, how they're creating their image, how they're creating, the tagline they're going to use for you, and what limitations, if you're, a family-owned business and they're going to use your photographs or images or likenesses, what does that contract say about the limitations on the use and who owns the image? It's just it's a minefield of legal issues, but something that you really want to stay on top of. It's interesting talking about the way it's gone wrong for businesses. We've already talked about a couple examples of how the use of AI has gone wrong from lawyers, but I know there's a couple other big ones out there, so let's get into some of the other stories.
Sure, I mentioned the one, the Southern District of New York, that's the most famous one right now,
Yeah.
but there was another recent one, and it just goes to demonstrate why it's not only important for lawyers to check the work that they do on ChatGPT, but verify the information that they get from their clients, because another sort of famous example, Michael Cohen gave his lawyer bogus legal citations concocted by the AI program Google Bard. The fictitious citations were used by the lawyer in a motion submitted to a federal judge. Mr. Cohen is quoted saying he had not realized the lawyer filing the motion on his behalf, David Schwartz, would drop the cases into his submission wholesale without even confirming that they existed. And Michael Cohen's lawyer acknowledged that he had not independently reviewed the cases, and he ended up having to get his own lawyer. So that goes to show that, you know, even information that you get from your clients, whether they're sophisticated clients or not, you always need to be verifying those cases in, you know, what has proven to be sources that can be relied on by attorneys like LexisNexis, Westlaw. You know, if your bar offers some type of option to look up cases within, you know, its program, then you can use something like that. But just relying, you know, blindly on information, I think this goes to say not only with case law, but with any type of information, make sure that you verify your sources and make sure that you know where the information is coming from and that it's reliable information.
And I think, again, it goes back to kind of a theme that has to be playing through your head at all times when you're using this stuff is, you know, at this point anyway, in the legal field, it's a starting point. Shouldn't be a running point. It shouldn't be.
It's a tool in your toolbox of everything that you have out there. But it definitely should not solely be relied on.
And I think we've kind of touched on this in terms of what governing bodies are doing to regulate this kind of stuff, if anything at all. And I think this is, we've seen with the use of, you know, a lot of technology is it seems that, you know, the technology just moves at a faster rate than the law can to catch up. So there's going to inevitably be a lag. Is that kind of what you see?
Yeah, I think so. I think that right now it seems like what the governing bodies are trying to wrap their head around and figure out how they're going to regulate is social media in general. I mean, while AI has been discussed, I don't think there has been much legislation to regulate it because it's so new. People don't know what they don't know. And that's probably how it's going to be for a while. You know, I think right now there's some stronger regulation coming out of European countries as far as protections on social media and, you know, who can post, what can be posted, how it can be posted. Can people use filters? Can people not use filters? If they do use filters, do they need to let the public know that they're using filters? These kinds of things are being talked about and legislation is being drafted and worked on in different governing bodies. As far as AI, I mean, the biggest example out there right now, I think, was the writer's strike in Hollywood, where I think they were able to negotiate and actually there is some language within the contract that was negotiated that discusses AI. And I think that was the first example of where that had happened. But, you know, as far as governing bodies having regulations on this, it's not there yet. So I think right now what companies can do is they can put it in their corporate policies as far as, you know, how they want their employees or their company utilizing AI and what they're comfortable with. You know, law firms, I think it's going to be a topic of discussion for them as far as how much they implement AI into their discovery process or, you know, putting that in their contracts
and protections
exactly. But it's just still so new that there's no
more to come.
There's more to come.
Much more to come. There will be a part 2 for sure on this subject. So I think maybe to wind things down and kind of sum up some of the things, maybe it's just good to go over how from the perspective of a law practice, how AI can be good for your client.
Yeah. I think that's a great topic. So, despite instances of where AI has gone wrong, there are so many examples of how AI is benefiting, every industry. But specifically within the legal industry, I think that it's going to be most useful, as we talked about earlier, in the discovery process. If we can sift through discovery much faster than we had been able to with, solely the speed at which a human can work, I think that will be better for the client because it will save them time and it will save them money. I think the whole goal would be to mitigate costs for the client.
Yeah.
And then as far as, just for clients' own information, they can use ChatGPT as a tool or a starting point to maybe understand some of the complex legal issues that are being discussed within their own case, and they can present their questions maybe in a much more sophisticated way to their attorneys to get the best answers that they're looking for. So it can be very helpful in synthesizing legalese, putting it into plain terms so that it's a language that everybody can speak together.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think as we kind of discussed, there's going to be a lot more to come on this issue. We're going to see a lot more headlines, I have a feeling. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.